Hey guys, look here real quick, because, okay, so under here, under layer styles, we haven't talked too much about all this. We've talked about bevel emboss and some of these other things, outer glow, but one of them here, and you can go through these, you know, obviously, but is gradient overlay. Sometimes it doesn't give me what I'm looking for. Hang on. Makes me crazy when I say that. Oh, here it is. Okay, so right here, if I go here, it can give me a real quick way to sort of give this an overlay, or if I go here, so it's right here, okay, I could change it, I can do, you know, change it down here and all that. And then, you know, if I change it, I could save that. But it's a really nice way to quickly change the color of an object, okay? It's just like the, and by the way, you're going to see the same thing we've talked about, this little angle wheel, which will just change the, basically the direction of the light, more or less. Also, let's cancel that. I could come in here, go layer style. Oops, layer style. And let's go color overlay. And I could do the same thing. I can very quickly change the color of something. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It's kind of a really nice way to do it. Also, I could come in here and go color libraries right here, if you guys remember that. And I could go, oh, I need Rubine red, okay? And what that would do, like I was talking about before, you know, Barbie is rhodamine red. I might, you know, if I was doing Barbie product, I'd pull rhodamine red. Does that make sense? Now, one other thing real quickly, and I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, but you guys need to learn this. If you're a graphic designer, if I'm doing something like, let's say this was a Barbie product and it was rhodamine red or whatever PMS color, I would have to create a spot channel for this, okay? What that means is it's going to put that color on a spot channel so it creates a separate plate for that particular ink. Does that make sense? And the reason I'm saying this is when you do it in Photoshop, it's a little more difficult. I'm not going to go to it in here. It's a little above this class, really, what I'm trying to cover. Or not above it. It's a different thing. Normally how I would do this is I would do it in Photoshop, or not Photoshop, Illustrator. Usually if I was doing things like package design, one-off package design, stuff like that, I do it in Illustrator, and it's just really easy to do in Illustrator. But I just want you to know, because sometimes you'll work with people and they'll go, well, you got to take it in Illustrator, and it's something you really can't take into Illustrator, and they'll go, you can't do a spot channel in Photoshop. Yes, you can, okay? And it's a simple thing. You can probably look it up on YouTube. It's not that hard. So let's look at another really simple thing. Does that make sense, all that? And what I want you to do, though, is in layer styles right here, because, again, these are pretty self-explanatory. You know, drop, shadow, all the stuff we talked about. But there's these other things in here that you can play around with, okay? So let's go. And I got this in a square format. So I think I have 1,000 by 1,000 pixels on this. Oops, I don't need this anymore. So I'll leave that like that. I screwed it up, but that's okay. Maybe I'll do this. Okay, now I've got all these different layers, so I'm going to go here. Oops, I don't want that one. I'm going to go here and combine them, which is that flyout menu right there, merge layers, or Command or Control E. And then I'm going to go, let me see if I can do it without selecting it. I'm going to go to Edit. Oops, what happened? Let me get rid of this real quick. I'm going to go to Edit. Oops. Now we had defined brush preset, and now we're going to define pattern. Does that make sense? Yes? Yeah, it did pick it up. Okay, so I'm going to say skull. And then I'm going to open up another document. Let's go bigger. I want to make this, make sure you're working in 72 in here so it doesn't get bogged down. And let's just use that. And I'm going to, let's just select this. And then I'm going to go edit. Now, under fill, we've talked about foreground color, background color, content aware, and now we're going to go to pattern. So it picked up my pattern right there. You can see it. So I'm going to go, oh, it's right here actually. This one right here, there it is. And I'm going to go boom. And it automatically places my pattern in there no matter how big this document is, and it'll just sort of tile it around. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, you can play around a little bit with this other thing. Let's see if I can get this to work. Because there is something here. You have to play with it a little bit. I won't go too far into it because it's kind of self-explanatory. I'm going to turn these off. And if I go here to filter, other, there's offset right here. And you can see what it does. It'll offset it where I want it to, so it'll repeat pattern. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Right now it's at 500, 500. I don't know why it's eliminating my middle one. Usually it doesn't do that. Let's turn this off. Yeah. So 500 by 500 seems to be okay. And I could create a repeat pattern that way. Does that make sense? Yeah. So grab something, I don't care what you use, and let's just try and make a quick pattern. Yeah? If I'm creating a complex document, and let's say this is my complex document, and I've got multiple levels or multiple layers. And let's say that these things are somehow related. Like maybe I have these in a group folder or whatever. They're somehow related. I don't want to have to do this. Go shift and grab all these to move them. Does that make sense? So I'm going to go grab all of these. And then right here I've got this little chain right there. So now what it just did, if you look to the right of these, it just chained them all together. So now when I come over here, and I've also got my select layer thing going, right? Now when I grab these, they'll just automatically be locked together, or I can come in here and maybe unlock them, or unlock one, or whatever I want to do. Does that make sense? It comes in really handy when you got to move things together all the time. It's a pain in the ass to grab them all the time, and especially when it starts to become a really complicated document. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, I'm not going to have you guys do that because I think that's pretty self-explanatory, right? Okay, so if you look here, okay, so if you look here under Image, Adjustments, and you'll see curves, okay? Better way to work it, like we've talked about before, is if I come here and I go wherever it is, it should be in here. There it is, curves. Okay, so then it's, what is it again? It's non-destructive. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so what it's giving you here, and once you understand this, it's sort of like what we do with our levels, where we level out contrast and light and dark, okay? But you can really tune it in here. So what you're seeing here, this is your, line representing the value and everything in here, okay, the lights and darks. But if you look over here to the right, it goes to the lighter end of the spectrum, and then it goes to the darker end of the spectrum. Same thing here. It goes lighter up, darker down. Does that make sense? So if I come over here and I go, I want to adjust these lighter pixels up here, I can place a point here and pull it up, and you can see it's pulling up that value a little bit. I can also, but it's also pulling up the darks a little bit. So I might have to come down here, and now I can really dial in my contrast adjustment. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now, they always call this a classic X curve, right? So you're kind of going in and you're pushing the darks and you're pushing the lights, okay? It's a really handy tool. And again, if I come in here and I go, oh, now I want to hit the mid-tones, and if I go up, if you notice, it goes lighter. If I go down, it goes darker. So let's do it here. It'll go darker. And if I go up, it goes lighter. Now you can see that right here in your graph. It goes darker at the bottom, lighter at the top, right? And on the spectrum, whatever I want to affect is on this spectrum. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, you can do this with color too. The only reason I don't want to get too much into color on this is it starts to get into this thing where it'll start, there's opposites of color when you go into the color spectrum, which is why I don't want to get into it too much. So if I add, let's say I push red, I think the opposite's like cyan or something, right? So it'll start to look like it's pushing cyan in there, and I have to start getting into a big color discussion, a big color theory discussion. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But it's something you might want to look into if you like to be able to really fine-tune things. I use it a lot for this kind of thing because I can really fine-tune my contrast. Does that make sense? Now, having said that, now we could always go back here if we wanted to, because now we have a layer mask, right? Right here. So I could just come back in here and I could readjust it. But I'm going to throw this out. And there's something in our, there's something in our, see how much duller it is without that, by the way? And look here's another thing. I can go down here, this little eyeball right here, I can turn it on and turn it off and see the two before and after. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And you can see, you know what's really weird is when you contrast up and you adjust a photo, you see how bad it looked in the beginning. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times you look at it and you go, oh, it looks fine. But then when you start messing with it, you realize it's not very good. Now, if you don't like any of this, you could go back to this little, this thing, by the way, is a universal symbol, this little swoop. If I want to just go back to the original settings, I can just do that and it nails it back to my original line. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Really simple, okay? So I'm going to throw that out. And one thing I didn't talk about, in our hue saturation filter right here, adjustments, hue saturation. So we know we can adjust our hue right here. So we can go through the color spectrum if you want. Oops, hang on. Let me do that again. I should be doing this on an adjustment layer too, by the way, but I'm not. I'm going here. Then we have our saturation where we can saturate it or desaturate it, and our light dark. Okay, now what we just did with the curves, if you look, normally if I pull this up, I'm pulling the whole thing up. The curves allow me to be targeted, okay? But if you look here under master right here, I can go to any of these channels, so let's say the reds, and I can, let's say, saturate it, and I'm mostly just saturating the reds because it's just the red channel. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I can go here and go to, let's see what else is in here. Let's try the blues. Sometimes there won't be a lot of it in there, so there's not much you can do with it. Yeah, it's just in the shadows, which I don't want. Let's go to, what's weird is they have blues and cyans, and cyan is a blue. Not much. That's in the sky, so if I want to pump the sky a little bit, I could do that. Okay. Magentas. Doesn't really have much effect, I think, because I affected so much of the red already. You know, and then the yellows and so on and so forth. Okay, but it basically just lets me saturate certain colors on their own, or light or dark or whatever. Does that make sense? Pull up something. I just want you to play with the curves a little bit, okay? Okay. So I've got this over here. Now this is something I just noticed because I just grabbed this random thing from a Illustrator file and I copied it, right? I don't know why, but with this particular filter, I can't copy it straight out of, which makes no sense to me, by the way. I can't copy it straight out of Illustrator. I have to put it into Photoshop and then copy it from Photoshop, okay? I don't know why that is. It's weird. And maybe it wouldn't do it on this computer, I don't know. But I'm going to copy it. Now, you might have seen this filter before, and a lot of people don't know what it's for. So it's this one right here says vanishing point. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a little selection. And then what I'm going to do is go in closer and make sure that like this one's way off. So I'm going to pull that in there. This one's a little off. I'll pull that in. This one's a little off. And so on. Okay. So now I'm going to go Command V. And if you see it's too big, so I'm going to go Command or Control T, and I'm going to shrink this thing. And what it does is it puts that whole thing, and I can make it smaller. I got to pull it over to get a corner if I want to make it smaller. And let's say that's good. And there it is. Right? Go ahead.
This might be like a dumb question, but can you also just pre-transform it on that image?
Yeah.
You can basically just pin each
But there's a lot of times, this is better.
sure, yeah.
It's just better. And then I'm going to go up here to layers. This is something I don't think we talked about. And I'm just going to go to layer style. I'm going to go to blending options. And right down here, you see this, it says underline layer. And I can kind of sometimes, I'll show it to you on another thing I want to do. Yeah, it's not picking up too much here. But sometimes I can pull that a little bit, and I can pick up the underlying layer a little bit, sort of like an overlay. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It doesn't really have enough texture for it to work here. I could also sort of, this one's just too whatever. But do you see how that just conforms it to that? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, you've got to create your own separate layer, okay? And then once you make your selection on that, then you've got, by the way, let's do this.